The stage lights of America's Got Talent burned brighter than he expected. From behind the curtain, the glow spilled onto the floor like a promise and a threat at the same time. He stood there for a moment longer than he should have, fingers clenched around the small laminated audition number, breathing slowly the way his mother had taught him when nerves tried to steal his voice. His name echoed faintly in his head, carried across oceans, from a crowded neighborhood in Manila to this massive theater where dreams either took flight or fell apart in seconds. When the cue finally came, he stepped forward. The applause that greeted him was polite, uncertain. Not the roar reserved for confident performers, not the silence given to obvious joke acts, just that middle sound, curious and cautious. He felt it immediately. He wore a simple button-up shirt, neatly pressed but clearly inexpensive, the kind you wear when you want to show respect rather than style. His shoes were clean but worn. Nothing about him screamed, star. Everything about him whispered, ordinary. The camera closed in as he walked to the center of the stage. He forced himself to look up. The audience stretched out before him like a living ocean, rows upon rows of faces, lights reflecting in their eyes. Somewhere out there were people who would decide, in less than 2 minutes, whether he mattered. He swallowed. At the judge's table, Simon Cowell leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, expression unreadable but alert in that familiar way that made contestants' hearts race. To Simon's right, the other judges smiled encouragingly, though even they seemed unsure what to expect. Simon tilted his head slightly, studying the man on stage the way a mechanic studies a car that doesn't look like it should run. "So," Simon said, his voice calm but sharp, cutting through the room. "Tell us your name." "My name is Juan," he answered, the accent gentle, the words careful. His voice was soft but steady. "And where are you from, Juan?" "Manila, Philippines." A small ripple of applause moved through the crowd. Simon nodded once. "What brings you here today?" Juan hesitated. For just a second, his eyes flickered downward, as if the weight of the question was heavier than it sounded. Then he looked back up. "I come here," he said, "because music saved me. And today, I want to share that." It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't polished. But it was honest. Simon raised an eyebrow. "All right. And what will you be singing for us?" Juan took a breath. The name felt enormous in his mouth, like invoking a legend inside a room that worshipped legends. Elvis Presley. The reaction was instant. A few people in the audience laughed, not cruelly, but skeptically. Some leaned toward each other, whispering. Elvis was sacred ground. Elvis was swagger, power, myth. From a shy man standing stiffly under stage lights, it sounded like a reach. Simon's lips pressed into a thin line. He didn't smile. He didn't frown either, which somehow felt worse. "Elvis," Simon repeated, as if testing the word. "That's a big choice." "Yes, sir," Juan replied quietly. Simon paused, then gestured toward the band. "All right then. Whenever you're ready." The music began, slow, familiar, unmistakable. Juan closed his eyes. In that instant, the theater disappeared. The lights faded into darkness, replaced by memories that rose uninvited but welcome. He was back in Manila, standing in a cramped living room with peeling paint and a ceiling fan that rattled like it might fall. His father sat in a plastic chair after another long day of work, exhaustion etched into his face. The radio on the shelf crackled, and then Elvis's voice filled the room, strong, aching, alive. As a child, Juan had felt something awaken in his chest then, something that told him he wasn't alone in the way he felt. The first note left his lips. It wasn't loud. It wasn't flashy. But it was real. The laughter stopped. The whispering faded. The sound that came from Juan was warm and textured, carrying a depth that didn't match his quiet demeanor. It wasn't an imitation of Elvis, it was an interpretation, shaped by years of listening, of singing alone when no one was watching, of pouring pain into melody because there was nowhere else to put it. Simon's posture changed almost imperceptibly. He leaned forward just a little. Juan opened his eyes as he continued, fixing his gaze somewhere above the judges' heads, as if singing to something unseen. His hands trembled slightly at his sides, not from fear now, but from the emotion rising up through his chest. Each lyric felt heavier than the last, as though he were confessing rather than performing. The audience sat unusually still. There were no cheers yet. No claps. Just silence, the kind that means people are listening with everything they have. Simon's expression shifted from skepticism to concentration. His eyes narrowed, not in doubt, but in focus. He wasn't judging anymore. He was absorbing. Juan reached the end of the opening verse and took a breath that felt like oxygen after years underwater. His confidence grew, not in arrogance, but in permission. Permission to believe that maybe this moment wasn't a mistake. Maybe this stage wasn't too big. Maybe his voice belonged here after all. As the music carried him forward, something subtle but undeniable happened in the room. Expectations cracked. Assumptions loosened their grip. The man they thought they understood when he walked out no longer fit the story they'd written for him. And before the song had even reached its heart, one truth had already become clear. This was not going to be the audition anyone expected. The song moved into its heart, and with it, something inside Juan finally broke open. The band swelled behind him, richer now, the rhythm steady and confident, as if it too had decided to trust him. Juan shifted his weight slightly, grounding himself. The nerves that had once threatened to steal his breath were gone. In their place was something far more powerful: release. He wasn't standing on the America's Got Talent stage anymore. He was standing inside every moment that had shaped him, every quiet struggle that had taught him how to sing with meaning instead of volume. When he reached the chorus, his voice changed. It didn't just grow louder, it deepened. The tone carried a rough edge, a lived-in texture that wrapped around the melody like a story whispered directly into the ear. It wasn't perfect in the technical sense, and that's what made it devastating. Each note bent slightly under the weight of emotion, as if the song itself were remembering things it had tried to forget. A murmur rolled through the audience, not laughter this time, not doubt, but recognition. People leaned forward in their seats. Phones that had been raised casually now held steady, forgotten by their owners, who stared at the stage with wide, unblinking eyes. A woman in the front row pressed her hand to her mouth. Somewhere farther back, someone whispered, "Oh my God," not loudly, but as if saying it too strongly might break the moment. At the judges' table, reactions unfolded in real time. One judge's smile faded into stillness, eyes glossy. Another nodded slowly to the rhythm, eyebrows raised in quiet disbelief. And Simon was no longer leaning back at all. He was fully forward now, elbows on the table, hands clasped, staring at Juan as if trying to solve a puzzle that had suddenly become deeply personal. Juan felt the shift before he saw it. He felt it in the silence between notes, in the way the room seemed to inhale with him and exhale only after he finished a phrase. That shared breath gave him courage. His shoulders relaxed. His stance widened just a fraction. He wasn't hiding anymore. As he sang the next lines, images flashed through his mind like fragments of a life story. His mother washing clothes by hand late at night, humming softly so she wouldn't wake the neighbors. His father listening to Elvis on an old radio, eyes closed, dreaming of a world beyond the narrow streets they walked every day. Himself as a teenager, singing quietly on a rooftop while the city buzzed below, imagining an audience that felt impossibly far away. All of that poured into his voice. The chorus returned, stronger now, and Juan let it rise from his chest without holding back. The sound filled the theater, not in a way that demanded attention, but in a way that commanded it. The judges' expressions mirrored what the audience felt, astonishment giving way to respect. Simon blinked, once, then again. For a man known for cutting performances apart with a sentence, he said nothing. His face, usually guarded, softened. The corners of his mouth twitched, not into a smile, but into something closer to awe. He shook his head slightly, as if the performance had contradicted something he thought he knew about talent, about risk, about expectation. Juan hit a note that hovered just shy of perfection, and instead of correcting it, he leaned into it. The vulnerability of that choice sent a visible shiver through the room. A few audience members wiped their eyes, surprised by their own reaction. This wasn't about technique anymore. This was about truth. As the bridge approached, the band pulled back, leaving space. Just Juan. Just his voice. The lights dimmed subtly, drawing focus inward. His breathing was audible now, the sound of a man holding something precious and fragile. When he sang the bridge, it felt like a confession spoken too softly to interrupt, too honestly to ignore. His eyes closed again, brow furrowed, as if he were speaking to someone who wasn't there, or someone who had never been able to hear him before. In the silence between lines, a single cough from the back of the theater sounded thunderous, then vanished into stillness again. No one wanted to be the one to break this spell. Simon's eyes glistened, though whether from the lights or something else, no one could say. He shifted in his chair, exhaling slowly through his nose, the way people do when they're trying not to react too much and failing anyway. When the music began to build toward the final chorus, Juan opened his eyes and looked directly at the judges for the first time. Not with fear, with resolve. He knew now, whatever happened next, he had already done something brave. He had shown them who he was. The final chorus exploded, not in volume, but in presence. Juan's voice carried every mile between Manila and this stage, every doubt that had told him he didn't belong here, every night he had sung alone because it was the only way to feel seen. The audience began to rise. Not all at once, one person, then another, then rows of people standing without realizing when they'd made the decision. The applause hadn't started yet, but the energy was undeniable, a wave lifting him higher with every note. Simon stood slowly, almost unconsciously, still clapping silently to himself, still shaking his head in disbelief. And as Juan held the final note, steady, open, unguarded, the truth settled over the room like a revelation. This wasn't just a performance that surprised them.